But particularly once Caitlin took over, and by the way, if Caitlin doesn't take this game over, they probably lose this game. If she doesn't go bonkers in the third, because it was basically a dead even game when she went absolutely berserk in the third quarter with that 17 points that she had.
That is the entire tension of this game in 30 seconds. Indiana won, but the bigger question is whether the Fever actually controlled Dallas or whether Caitlin Clark simply grabbed a dead-even game and changed it by herself.
And Caitlin Clark had a big night, particularly in the third quarter. She had a massive, massive third quarter. 34 minutes, 29 points, 11 of 18, 2 of 8 from three-point range, 10 assists. She only had one turnover tonight, by the way.
Look at that line before we go anywhere else. 29 points in only 24 minutes, 11 of 18 from the floor, 10 assists and just one turnover. The three-point shot was not even falling consistently, which is what makes the performance more interesting. Clark went only 2 of 8 from deep, so this wasn't one of those nights where she casually buries 6 logo threes and the box score explodes. She was scoring inside, manipulating defenders, finding teammates, pushing pace, and taking what Dallas gave her. And that matters because Indiana did not spend the entire night looking like a team that was obviously better than the Wings. For long stretches, Dallas was hanging right there. The Fever needed somebody to create separation, and eventually Clark became that person. But there are really two stories happening here. One is what Caitlin did on the floor. The other is what happened in that building around Stephanie White. Because after everything surrounding this team recently, the reaction White received from Fever fans was probably not what some people expected. And there's a reason that reaction may matter much more than one round of applause. We'll get there, because the combination of Clark's performance, Sophie Cunningham's support, and the crowd's response could tell us something about where this Fever fan base actually stands right now.
Ty Harris, by the way, hit some big threes tonight. 5 of 5 from three-point range. And Paige Bueckers knocked down 29 points tonight. And I told the chat, Ben Daniel Podcast TV chat, in the watch party, I was like, that's the quietest, 29 points that I've ever seen from maybe any player ever. Caitlin Clark, I mean, you knew Caitlin Clark was knocking it dead. Paige Bueckers, it was like, I never even noticed, to be honest with you. I went to check her stats and was like, at the time I checked, it was 27 points. I was like, 27 points?
Dallas deserves credit here too, because Paige Bueckers finished with 29 points of her own. The funny observation from the broadcast was how quietly those points seemed to arrive. That isn't an insult. In some ways, it's a compliment. Certain scorers can pile up production without the game ever feeling like it has become their personal highlight reel. Clark's night felt completely different because her impact came in waves that changed the emotional temperature of the game. That's an important distinction when people compare box scores. Two players can finish with the same number beside their name and have completely different relationships with how the game unfolded. And Indiana needed the disruptive version of Clark because Dallas wasn't just showing up to participate. They were competitive enough that you could see the possibility of an upset hanging around. One bad Fever stretch, a couple empty possessions, one momentum swing, and suddenly this becomes a very different conversation. That's why the third quarter becomes the center of the basketball story. Not because Clark merely accumulated points, but because she hit the accelerator at the exact moment Indiana needed someone to change the terms of the game.
Sophie Cunningham, let's check it out right here. The pass out to Soph, way downtown. Boom, knocked it down. Three-pointer. Caitlin Clark, by the way, 10 points in 5 minutes at one point.
That play is a perfect example of how dangerous Indiana becomes when Clark is forcing the defense to account for her before she even shoots. The ball moves. Sophie Cunningham gets the opportunity, and suddenly Dallas has another problem to solve. This is where evaluating Clark only through her own scoring misses part of what makes her difficult to defend. Every possession starts becoming a choice. Do you crowd her farther from the basket and risk opening space behind the first defender? Do you stay attached to shooters and let her get downhill? Do you bring help and trust the rotation behind it? Every answer creates another question, and when Indiana's supporting players actually punish those decisions, the whole offense looks different. That is what the Fever have been trying to unlock. Clark does not need to take 30 shots for her presence to dominate a defense. She needs teammates to turn the pressure she creates into points. That is also why this game shouldn't become one of those lazy discussions where everybody either says Caitlin carried them or swings completely the other direction and pretends the Fever were rolling perfectly as a unit. Both can be partially true. Indiana had useful contributions around her, but the engine still had a very obvious driver when the game reached its turning point.
She gets the ball, drives down. Oh, that little stutter step, drive through the lane for the layup, that was filthy, to be honest with you. Absolutely filthy.
That right there is the part of Clark's development that can become terrifying for opponents. Everybody enters the possession worried about the pull-up three, and then she uses that fear against you. The stutter, the change of pace, the lane opening for a split second, and she's through it. Defending a player with extreme shooting range is already exhausting because your normal concept of where the possession becomes dangerous gets stretched toward half-court. If that same player can consistently weaponize the attention and attack the basket, now the defender has to guard two completely different threats from one body position, and this is exactly why nights where the outside shot isn't automatic can actually reveal more about a player. Anybody can look unstoppable when every jumper is dropping. What do you do when that primary weapon isn't at its best? Clark answered by finding other ways into the game. That's also where the 11th best guard jab mentioned in the source lands with some bite. Rankings are always going to generate arguments, and people can debate methodology all day. But performances like this are why Clark supporters get irritated when they believe her impact is being undersold. The case isn't simply built around popularity. It comes from how dramatically a game can tilt once she starts solving what the defense is doing.
Caitlin Clark also in the third. Right here, three-pointer. She's going to pull up. Way downtown, bam. Knocked it down. Knocked it down.
And then, after you've adjusted to the drive, she reminds you why you were terrified of the jumper in the first place. That's the defensive trap. Give Clark a little extra cushion because she just attacked the lane, and she can pull from a distance most guards treat as emergency territory. Step higher, and now you have to survive the first move with less room behind you. This was the section of the night where Indiana started imposing itself instead of merely trading possessions, and there is a major difference between winning and controlling. A team can be ahead on the scoreboard without ever making the opponent feel like the game is escaping. When an individual player starts stacking different types of successful possessions together, that feeling changes quickly. Now put yourself on the Dallas bench during that run. You've competed. You've stayed connected. You're dealing with an Indiana team that hasn't simply blown you out of the building. Then one player suddenly starts producing answers from multiple areas of the floor, and the margin begins moving. That's why the takeover matters beyond the highlight package. It solved a real problem for Indiana, but this is also where we have to be fair to Dallas, because there was a significant piece unavailable to them, and ignoring that would make the analysis much less credible.
But again, Jessica Shepard, arguably their best player on the team, let's just keep it real, this year. Oh, but Paige, yeah, okay. Jessica Shepard's getting left kind of lost in the media's Paige Bueckers narrative. She didn't play. So we've got to see once she comes back and they play.
Jessica Shepard's absence is not some tiny footnote you bury after celebrating the win. According to the commentary, she has arguably been Dallas's best player this season, even while a lot of the national attention naturally gravitates toward Bueckers. That doesn't invalidate Indiana's victory. You beat the players available to play. Nobody awards half a win because the other team had somebody missing, but it absolutely affects what conclusions you should draw from the result. This is where sports discussion tends to become unnecessarily tribal. One side wants every Fever win to prove that Indiana is unstoppable. The other side wants every missing opponent to mean the win doesn't count. Neither position is useful. The more reasonable takeaway is that Indiana beat a quality Dallas team, while Dallas was shorthanded, and Dallas still gave the Fever enough resistance to expose how fragile the game could have been before Clark's explosion. That is valuable information for both teams. For the Wings, it gives them a reason to believe another meeting with a healthier rotation could look different. For Indiana, it reinforces that they cannot expect star power to erase every problem forever. Because eventually you're going to play an opponent with all of its important pieces available. Eventually Clark is going to have a quarter where the shots don't come. Eventually an opposing defense will force somebody else to be the one who creates the separation. And that is where this Fever team will ultimately be judged. Not by whether Caitlin can save a difficult night. We already know she can change one. The bigger question is how often Indiana can prevent the game from requiring a rescue in the first place.
Mikayla Timpson, guys, this pass was absolutely sick from Mikayla Timpson. Watch this. That's Aaliyah Boston coming down the lane. She's going to pass it to Timpson. Watch this little pass back. Quick pass back. It was filthy. It was filthy to Aaliyah Boston.
That sequence gives you the other side of the equation. Mikayla Thompson makes the quick return pass. Aaliyah Boston is moving through the lane, and the possession is decided by timing instead of one player holding the ball until everybody else becomes a spectator. Those possessions are enormously important for Indiana because there is a temptation with a superstar creator to let the entire offense collapse into give her the ball and figure something out. That can work in short bursts. It can even win games. But over a long season, the better teams turn the superstar's gravity into an ecosystem. Boston is essential to that because she gives Indiana a completely different type of pressure. If she is screening, rolling, sealing, cutting, and finishing decisively, the defense cannot simply load everything toward Clark. Cunningham gives you spacing and edge. Kelsey Mitchell supplies another scorer defenses have to respect. When those pieces connect, Indiana stops looking like one brilliant player dragging four teammates into every possession. And that brings us to another subtle part of this game. The 20-point Kelsey Mitchell scoring streak was in some danger before Clark left the floor, and then Mitchell got enough opportunities to keep it alive. That illustrates why role balance matters. Players still need touches. Scorers still need rhythm. A team with multiple weapons has to feed them without taking the ball away from the person creating the best offense. That balancing act is where coaching comes in, which takes us directly into the Stephanie White story.
People are gonna find hard to believe, but I'm gonna be fair on this channel. I reached out to Johnny Root from Outkick at halftime, and I said, "What is the story with Stephanie White getting cheered?" Because he was in attendance. He shared a video, and he did confirm the cheering was absolutely legitimate. He said they were not piping noise in there. He said, yeah, the fans cheered for Stephanie White.
Now this is where things get interesting. The commentator says he contacted Johnny Root from Outkick, who was reportedly at the game, specifically because he wanted to verify whether the cheers for Stephanie White were legitimate. According to that account, Root confirmed that the reaction was real and was not artificial arena noise. That matters because perception around White has been unusually heated. When criticism gets intense online, it can create the impression that everybody in the fan base has reached the exact same conclusion. Then you get inside the arena and sometimes discover that reality is much messier. A cheering crowd doesn't mean every fan suddenly agrees with every decision White has ever made. It doesn't erase criticism of rotations, comments, strategy, or anything else people have argued about, but it does challenge the idea that she had completely lost the building. And according to the theory offered here, support from Cunningham and Clark may have influenced that response. Think about how powerful that dynamic is in professional sports. Fans often have complicated relationships with coaches. They can be furious about a timeout one night, furious about a quote the next morning, and then respond differently when the players they trust publicly show unity. Players can provide a coach something that press conferences cannot: credibility inside the locker room. That doesn't mean unconditional approval. It means the temperature can change. And if you're trying to understand why the reaction inside Gainbridge Fieldhouse didn't necessarily match the angriest corners of social media, the players themselves may be the bridge.
White. And I wanted to make sure. Before I talked about this. John confirmed to me that the cheers for Stephanie White were, in fact, legit and not pumped noise. He's on the scene tonight. I've got to be fair, and I'm going to be. Think about this. Caitlin Clark scored 29, had 9 points at the half.
Notice the care being taken there. He didn't want to run with the crowd reaction until he had confirmation from someone he trusted who was actually present. That's the right instinct, especially when a moment conveniently fits whichever narrative somebody already wants to believe. If you're anti-white, you could hear cheers and immediately claim they were fake. If you're completely pro-white, you could hear cheers and declare every controversy finished. Neither conclusion follows from the evidence. What the moment actually tells us is narrower and more interesting. White still received a genuine positive response from a home crowd after a period of significant public scrutiny. Now ask yourself why. Winning obviously helps. A crowd watching Clark light up the second half is going to be in a much better mood than a crowd watching a collapse. Player support can help, team solidarity can help, and fans are not one giant organism with a single opinion. This is the payoff that was sitting underneath the basketball story from the beginning. The most important development wasn't that Stephanie White suddenly won everybody back. We cannot establish that from one introduction. The important development is that the relationship between White and Fever supporters appears more complicated than the loudest online reaction suggested. And that complexity creates a fascinating pressure point going forward. Because cheers are temporary. Results last longer. If Indiana keeps winning important games and the offense looks connected, White's standing naturally becomes stronger. If the Fever start dropping close games because of questionable late possessions, stagnant stretches, or decisions fans don't understand, the criticism can return almost immediately. That's coaching. The emotional stock price changes every night.
And I'm not going to act like it wasn't. They're now 22-12, and I guess the Dallas Wings are 20-15 now. Dallas Wings, don't look now, fading a little bit.
The standings angle adds another layer. Indiana moves forward while Dallas is described as beginning to fade. And that changes how these games feel as the season moves deeper. Early in a season, you can talk about experimentation. Later, every win starts affecting positioning, confidence, potential matchups, and the way teams perceive themselves. A game against Dallas isn't just another date on the schedule if both teams are trying to establish where they belong in the hierarchy. For Indiana, that's why getting the win matters even if the performance wasn't flawless. Good teams need to collect games that aren't clean. You're not going to play beautiful basketball every night. Sometimes the three ball isn't perfect. Sometimes the opponent hangs around. Sometimes you need one player to rip the game open. The concern only appears if that becomes the permanent blueprint. There is a difference between having a superstar capable of taking over and needing a superstar takeover as your only reliable escape hatch. Indiana wants the first version. The second version becomes dangerous in postseason basketball, where opponents prepare specifically to remove your favorite actions, possessions slow down, and every weakness gets attacked repeatedly. You cannot assume a 17-point burst is going to appear exactly when needed against elite defenses. That's why the Fever should enjoy this performance while also studying the first half carefully. The useful film isn't only the stuff that went right. It's everything Dallas did that kept the game competitive before Indiana found daylight. The best teams learn from wins before losses force them to.
So, what can you say? It was a good win over a quality opponent that was missing a key piece. Oh, but Rhodes, Azzy Fudd. Okay. Jessica Shepard, again, just throwing that out. Missing a key piece, a big piece. but it was still a good win. Caitlin Clark, the double-double, huge game. And, yeah, she went on one of her takeovers in the third quarter, no doubt about it.
That's the fair conclusion on the basketball side. A legitimate win over a dangerous opponent, with the necessary context that Dallas was missing an important piece. But Caitlin Clark's performance gives the game a larger meaning because it showed multiple versions of her offense in one night. She facilitated efficiently. She got downhill. She punished space from deep. She controlled a major stretch without coughing the ball away repeatedly. And when Indiana needed the geometry of the game to change, she changed it. Those are the performances that make MVP conversations and guard rankings so combustible. People get trapped arguing over isolated categories when the bigger question is impact. What happens to the game because this player is on the floor? That's where Clark's argument is strongest. The defense extends farther. Passing windows appear that normally aren't there. Teammates receive cleaner opportunities because defenders are leaning toward her. Transition possessions become more dangerous because she sees passes earlier than most players attempt them. And once she starts scoring at all three levels, the opponent's menu of safe decisions gets very short. None of that means she is flawless. It shouldn't be controversial to acknowledge weaknesses when they appear. She will have inefficient shooting nights. Defenses will pressure her. Physical teams will test her. There will be possessions where she needs to get off the ball sooner or manage tempo differently. But honest criticism only works when honest praise is allowed too. And this was a night that deserved the praise. The intriguing part is what happens when you combine that performance with the atmosphere around the team. Indiana left with a win. Clark produced a takeover. White received authentic cheers according to an eyewitness account, and the players appeared to be pulling the crowd toward unity rather than deeper division. That doesn't resolve every Fever controversy. It does suggest the story may be moving.
I assume the Stephanie White got cheered situation is going to get very interesting in the comments section. I got to tell you, if I couldn't have reached out and literally talked to somebody like Johnny that works for Outkick, that I trust, and that I've talked to several times in the past about different things, and I would be very skeptical. But I'm going to keep it real. If he says it was real, it was real.
And that's probably the smartest place to leave this, because skepticism is healthy when something doesn't match your expectations. Verify it, attribute it, and then deal with what the evidence says, instead of forcing the evidence to fit what you wanted. The cheers were reportedly real. That does not equal a blank check for Stephanie White. It means the people inside that arena were willing to give her a positive response in that moment, and anyone analyzing this team fairly has to acknowledge it. Now the burden shifts back to basketball. Can White turn that goodwill into sustained confidence by getting more complete performances out of this roster? Can Indiana reach the point where Clark doesn't need a nuclear quarter every time a quality opponent refuses to go away? Can Boston, Mitchell, Cunningham and the rest of the rotation consistently capitalize on all the defensive attention Clark creates? And if they do, how high is the actual ceiling of this Fever team? Because that is where this gets bigger than one win against Dallas. The Fever have something many teams spend years trying to find, a player capable of dramatically altering the direction of a game in minutes. The hard part is building a system around that player that becomes stronger because of her brilliance, instead of dependent on emergency brilliance from her. If Indiana solves that, nights like this won't feel like Clark rescued them. They'll feel like Clark simply finished what the entire team had already built. But if they don't solve it, then every close game becomes a gamble. You spend 2 or 3 quarters hanging around with an opponent, wait for number 22 to produce something outrageous, and hope her individual greatness covers whatever structural problems remain underneath. That's not a sustainable championship formula, no matter how talented the star is. So now you have to pick a side. Did this game show that the Fever are finally becoming a dangerous connected team around Caitlin Clark? Or did it show that Clark is still the one player standing between Indiana and a lot more uncomfortable losses? And on Stephanie White, were those cheers evidence that Fever fans are ready to move forward with her, or does she still have to prove it game after game? Drop your answer in the comments, hit like if you enjoyed the breakdown, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.